Have you ever felt like you're the one ruining your own life? Like every time you get close to something good, something inside you pulls away, you get the job, and suddenly lose all motivation. You fall in love and start picking fights you don't understand. You promise change and break it before it begins. And you wonder, what's wrong with me? What part of me can't let me be happy? But what if the answer isn't that you're broken? What if the answer is you're divided? There's a voice inside you, you don't talk about it, but it talks to you sometimes with silence, sometimes with shame, sometimes with fear, dressed as protection. It's the voice that says, get too close. Don't try too hard. Don't expect too much. But here's what you've never been told. That voice isn't your enemy, it's your shadow. And the moment you stop running from it is the moment everything changes. Ethan stared at the apartment ceiling like it held the answer to a question he couldn't form. The woman he thought he'd marry had just walked out the door. And he hadn't tried to stop her. He knew what came next, the regret, the self-loathing, the long hours trying to convince himself that maybe it was for the best. But somewhere, deep beneath the rationalizations, was a whisper, a part of him he couldn't quite reach, a part that felt strangely relieved, and that terrified him. Because this wasn't the first time, it was the pattern. Every time life began to feel good, something inside Ethan sabotaged it. He'd land the job he wanted, then start showing up late, missing deadlines, eventually quitting before he got fired. He'd find love, then start finding fault, then finding the exit. He would promise himself change, then break that promise like all the ones before, and always, that same voice would return, not loud, not angry, but familiar. You're not meant for this. You'll only ruin it. Better to leave first than be left behind. That voice wasn't random, it had a pattern, a rhythm, and Ethan had followed it all his life, thinking it was instinct, thinking it was truth. But what if it wasn't? What if it wasn't truth, but programming? What if it wasn't instinct, but a wound dressed as wisdom? Ethan didn't have language for it yet, but he could feel it. A part of him was breaking things not because he was broken, but because it thought it was protecting him. It didn't want success. It didn't want love, it wanted safety. And in Ethan's world, safety had never looked like love. It had looked like silence, withdrawal, disconnection. So when love came close, his nervous system called it danger. And his shadow responded exactly as it had been trained to. It shattered things before they could bloom. But Ethan was tired. Tired of running from ghosts. Tired of ruining the very things he longed for. He didn't know what healing looked like, but he knew what pain looked like. And pain had become too familiar. So that night, staring at the ceiling of an empty apartment, Ethan made a decision. Not to fix himself, not to force change, but to listen. To the part of him that ruins everything, just when it starts to feel good, because maybe that part wasn't trying to ruin anything at all. Maybe it was just trying to be heard. And what Ethan didn't know yet was that listening would change everything. Ethan was 8 years old when he first heard it, that voice, not in words, but in the quiet that followed his crying. He had just lost his favorite toy, one he carried everywhere. It slipped from his backpack and vanished during recess. He came home in tears, ran to his father, clung to his shirt, and sobbed into his chest. His father peeled him off gently, then knelt down and looked him in the eyes. "Stop crying," he said. "You're too sensitive. It's just a toy." Just a toy, but to Ethan, it was never just a toy. It was comfort, it was memory, it was something that felt safe in a world that didn't. But what Ethan learned that day wasn't how to cope. He learned how to bury. That sadness didn't earn softness, it earned distance, so he stopped crying. But the feeling didn't stop. It just moved inward, turned quiet, and started speaking in other ways. By the time Ethan was 12, he had mastered the art of holding it in. He didn't cry when he was left out, didn't flinch when his parents argued, didn't speak up when he was bullied, but he felt it, all of it, like pressure building under a calm surface. He became the good kid. Polite, helpful, quiet. Everyone said he was mature for his age, but inside he was tired, tired of pretending things didn't hurt, tired of swallowing feelings with a smile. By 16, he was the guy who helped everyone else, who listened, who fixed, but never asked for help, because deep down, he still remembered his father's voice. "You're too much." So he became less expressive, less demanding, less visible, until one day he disappeared, not from the world but from himself. He smiled, he laughed, he achieved. But something was missing, something quiet, something buried, and that part had never stopped watching, never stopped waiting for the day it would finally be safe to be seen. If this feels familiar to you, if you've ever felt like you had to shrink yourself just to stay loved, you're not alone. You don't need to explain why, just breathe. Just stay here. And when you're ready, you can leave a quiet "me too" in the comments. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Because the part of you that was silenced still remembers the sound of your voice. And maybe, just maybe, it's been waiting for this moment all along. There's a part of you you've never seen, but it's been with you all along, in every panic that felt irrational, in every silence that felt safer than speaking, in every exit you made before anyone could leave you. Carl Jung called it the shadow, not because it's evil, not because it's dark, but because it lives where light hasn't reached. It's the part of you that was rejected, dismissed, unloved. And so it hid. But hiding doesn't mean disappearing. Your shadow doesn't vanish just because you ignore it. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it whispers. It whispers through your fear of being seen, through your dread of success, through your compulsion to push people away. Even when all you want is to be held. The shadow is not your enemy, it's your unspoken history. Every time you were told you were too much, every time you decided to be less, every time you said "I'm fine," when you weren't all of that, lives there in the basement of your being. And here's the truth no one told you: the shadow doesn't control you with force. It steers you with stories, stories it believes will keep you safe. Because once upon a time, they did, if rejection used to follow expression. The shadow learns to silence you if love came with pain. The shadow learns to fear connection if achievement earned punishment. The shadow learns to sabotage success. And here's where it gets tricky. The shadow doesn't growl, it protects, it guards, it loves you. In the only way it knows how, by keeping you in familiar pain. Rather than risking unfamiliar joy. It's not weakness, it's loyalty. But that loyalty is outdated. It was written by a child who needed safety, but didn't have the tools to ask for it. That child wrote your rule book, and you've been following it ever since. Not because you're broken, but because you were smart, you survived. But now, you're not a child anymore, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to update the rules. So pause for a second. Breathe. What's one belief you carry that once protected you, but now limits you? Just notice it. Don't judge it. It was there for a reason. And the moment you see it, really see it, you begin the shift from shadow to self, from sabotage to awareness, from fear to freedom. The shadow isn't something you fight, it's someone you meet, and right now, that meeting is beginning. Ethan always thought his fears were irrational, that the panic that rose in his chest during moments of intimacy, the sudden urge to disappear just when things felt right, were signs of weakness. But they were. They were signs of an internal compass pointing toward safety, but pointing the wrong way. You see, the shadow doesn't sabotage what's good, it sabotages what feels unsafe. And for many of us, joy feels unsafe, success feels dangerous, love feels like a trap, because somewhere in our wiring, we've learned that the cost of vulnerability is pain. So when love shows up, your shadow prepares for impact. It scans for signs. Is this too fast? Are they pulling away? What if they leave? And before they can, you leave first. Ethan did this for years. He'd pull back when someone got too close, pick fights over nothing, overthink every word. He called it anxiety. He called it being difficult. But deep down, it was his shadow trying to protect the boy who once cried alone. There was a woman once, Sarah, bright, patient. She saw through his walls and she waited. But Ethan couldn't. Every time they laughed, he felt a tightening. Every time she opened up, he braced for the end. He didn't know how to relax into love, because love had never felt safe. And so he did what the shadow whispered. He ghosted her, no explanation, no goodbye, just silence. And the moment he did, he felt relief, not because he didn't care, but because, for the first time in weeks, he could breathe. The danger was over, the danger of being seen. This is the paradox. The shadow doesn't want to ruin your life. It wants to preserve your safety, even if that means keeping you in loneliness, even if that means breaking your own heart. Before someone else gets the chance, it's not sabotage, it's a reflex programmed by pain. But what if that reflex could be rewired? What if you could teach your shadow that it doesn't need to guard you from love anymore? That safety can feel like connection, that presence can feel like protection if this is something you've felt. If you've ever watched yourself walk away from something you wanted deeply, just to feel safe again, I want you to know this: you're not self-destructive, you're self-protective. And protection can be learned anew. You can start small. With a breath, with a pause, with the choice to stay 1 second longer before retreating, and when you're ready, you can share something below, a sentence, a whisper, a moment when your shadow stepped in, and you let it speak, because in the sharing, we make the unseen seen, and that is how the healing begins, not with force, but with understanding. Not with pushing through, but with finally listening. And as Ethan would soon learn, once the shadow is heard, it softens. There was a moment in Ethan's third therapy session when everything shifted, not because something new was said, but because something old was finally seen. His therapist had been quiet that day, just listening, letting Ethan circle his patterns again and again, until she asked one simple question. What's the first time you learned that love could hurt? Ethan didn't speak for a while. He just stared at the carpet. And then he remembered. He was 5, standing in the hallway of his childhood home. He had drawn a picture for his mom, a bright sun, stick figures holding hands, his heart in crayon. On paper, she looked at it, barely smiled, then went back to her phone. No cruelty, no shouting, just absence. But for a 5-year-old, that moment wrote a rule: love means giving, but not receiving. Love means effort without echo. And that rule became a lens. So when Sarah smiled at Ethan years later, when she looked at him like he mattered, something inside him panicked. Because that wasn't how love was supposed to feel. Love wasn't supposed to be warm. It was supposed to be distant, cool, safe. That rule had protected him, helped him expect little, need nothing, stay invisible. But it was outdated, and it was breaking him. And that's the paradox of the shadow. It's not trying to ruin your life. It's trying to follow the old rules. It believes it's saving you by sabotaging joy. Because the nervous system doesn't crave happiness, it craves familiarity. And if pain is familiar, then pain becomes home. So the moment joy arrives, the body revolts, the mind retreats. The shadow acts not out of malice, but out of memory. Ethan finally saw it. The pattern wasn't madness, it was method. He had been loyal not to truth, not to desire, but to old pain, because once upon a time pain meant connection. Withdrawal meant survival, and the body never forgot. That day in therapy, Ethan didn't cry, he didn't rage, he just whispered, "I don't want to live by those rules anymore." And his therapist said, "Then let's write new ones." It didn't fix everything, but it opened something, a door he didn't know was there. Because when you realize your worst habits are actually your deepest attempts to stay safe, compassion becomes possible. You stop fighting your shadow. and start listening to it, you begin to see the loyalty beneath the sabotage. And that changes everything, so I want to ask you, what's one old rule you've been living by? That maybe, just maybe, isn't true anymore. You don't need to have an answer now. But if one comes, you can write it down, and that alone is the beginning of rewriting your story. One truth at a time, one breath at a time, one shadow seen at last. The first letter Ethan wrote was to his anger. He didn't plan it, didn't even know why he picked up the pen that night. But something inside him needed a voice, and words felt safer on paper. He sat at his kitchen table, a cup of cold tea beside him, the house quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like holding your breath. And he wrote, "Dear anger, I've hated you, I've hidden you. I've blamed you for every outburst, every slammed door, every goodbye I never explained. But now I see you were trying to protect me from humiliation, from abandonment, from the sharp edges of disappointment. You spoke up. When I didn't know how, you created space. When I didn't feel safe to stay, you were the fire when I needed to burn a bridge before someone pushed me off it. And I want to say thank you, but I'm not 5 anymore. I don't need to scream to be heard. I don't need to destroy just to feel in control. I'm learning now, I'm listening, and I want to ask you, will you walk with me instead of running the show?" He put the pen down, exhaled. He didn't feel cured, he felt cracked open, like a window had been lifted in a room long sealed shut. And so he wrote more, to shame, to fear, to the part of him that pushed Sarah away. He didn't ask them to leave. He asked them what they needed. That was new. Integration isn't about exile, it's about invitation. Not get rid of this part of me, but sit with it, see it, understand why it's there. Because healing isn't subtraction, it's multiplication, the reclaiming of all your parts, especially the ones you were taught to fear. So Ethan began a practice each night. He wrote to one part of himself he'd hidden. He didn't try to fix it, just named it, described it, listened to what it said, and slowly the noise quieted, not because the voices disappeared, but because they no longer needed to scream, they were being heard. And in that hearing, he found something unexpected: power, not the loud kind, but the rooted kind. The kind that says, I know who I am, I know where I've been, and I no longer need to abandon myself to feel safe. This is what integration looks like, not a perfect version of you, but an honest one that holds space for rage without becoming it, one that acknowledges shame without being ruled by it, one that sees fear and still chooses to stay. Because when you learn to sit with your shadow, you become whole, not overnight, not in a single session, but letter by letter, moment by moment, breath by breath. And maybe tonight you could try, pick a part of yourself you've ignored, give it a name, write it a letter, see what it says, not to fix it, but to feel it. Because what you feel, you can heal. And what you heal becomes a guide, even if it once was your ghost. Healing doesn't arrive like lightning. It drips like water through stone. And for Ethan, it looked like 100 quiet choices. He started with the morning. Instead of checking his phone, he placed a hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and asked, "What do you need today?" Sometimes the answer was rest, sometimes movement, sometimes silence. The point wasn't the answer, it was the asking, because every time he asked, he made contact with himself. That was the beginning of new safety, not the safety of isolation, but the safety of connection to his own inner world. Ethan began tracking his triggers, not to avoid them, but to understand them. A text left unread used to spiral him into panic. Now he paused, breathed, and asked, is this silence about them, or about something I remember from before? He stopped reacting, started responding. He didn't need to prove himself in meetings anymore, didn't need to be the funniest in the room, didn't need to keep everyone at arm's length, because he had begun to trust something closer, quieter, within, and that shifted everything. One day he was walking home from work, past a couple holding hands in the past. that would have made him flinch: jealousy, grief, shame. But this time he smiled, not because he had what they had, but because he no longer hated that he wanted it. Desire had stopped feeling dangerous. That's how you know you're healing, not when nothing hurts, but when longing feels sacred again. He started saying yes to invitations, started calling friends back, started speaking slower, eating slower, thinking slower. The world hadn't changed, but his nervous system had. And slowly so did his relationships. People noticed, not in dramatic ways, but in the softness of his presence, the steadiness of his eye contact, the way he no longer flinched at compliments. He was building a home inside himself, one brick at a time, and that home could now welcome others. Safety isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of choice. And Ethan was finally choosing from love, not from fear. If you're here still listening, still breathing, that means you're choosing to not to be perfect, not to erase the past, but to create a present where safety is redefined not as control, but as compassion, not as silence, but as voice, not as shrinking, but as returning to yourself. To the part that never stopped hoping that healing is possible. Her name was Lena. They met at a bookstore, not in the fiction aisle, but over a spilled coffee near the register. It was small, unscripted, human. And Ethan didn't flinch, not at first. They talked. He made her laugh. She asked for his number. He gave it, without hesitation. That night as he walked home, he felt it, that old flicker, the one that used to mean danger. But this time, he didn't run. He noticed it, placed a hand on his chest, and whispered, "It's okay to want this." Weeks passed. They shared meals, stories, silences, and slowly Lena became familiar. Familiar should have meant safety, but for Ethan, it triggered something deeper. One night after she kissed his forehead and said, "You feel like home," he froze. His body didn't feel warmth, it felt warning. His heart raced, his jaw tightened. His first thought was, leave now. The shadow had returned, not to destroy, but to protect. It whispered, "This is the part where it all breaks." But Ethan didn't move. He stayed in that moment, felt the urge to vanish, felt the weight of all the goodbyes he'd created. And then he did something different. He told Lena not everything, but just enough. That love for him was a minefield. That safety had once meant being alone. That sometimes he still wanted to disappear, even when he didn't want to. She listened. Didn't try to fix it, didn't make it about her. She just said, "I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to." That night, Ethan cried in her arms for the first time. Tears didn't mean weakness, they meant presence. He wasn't healed, not completely, but he was honest, he was seen. And the shadow, it didn't vanish, it just softened, because now it wasn't carrying everything alone. Integration doesn't mean the fear goes away, it means it no longer drives the car. Love no longer felt like a test. It felt like an invitation to show up, to speak, to stay. And each day Ethan did, not perfectly, but intentionally. He noticed when his body tensed. He noticed when he wanted to pull away. And instead of vanishing, he breathed, he spoke, he chose to stay. This is what transformation looks like, not grand declarations, but tiny, trembling choices made over and over until they become who you are. Love won't always feel safe at first, especially if your history taught you otherwise, but safety can be rebuilt in relationship, in truth, in presence. And maybe, like Ethan, you're closer than you think. Ethan used to believe healing meant becoming someone new, stronger, wiser, untouchable. But that was never the goal. Healing meant becoming someone true, not flawless, not fearless, but whole. He still had bad days, still caught himself pulling back when praise felt too intimate, still felt the shadow stir when quiet lasted too long. But now, he didn't panic. He noticed, he named, he breathed, and most importantly, he stayed. That was the shift. Wholeness didn't mean the pain was gone. It meant the pain had a place, a seat at the table, but not the head of it. Ethan learned to hold contradiction, to feel love and fear at the same time, to allow joy without waiting for it to disappear, to trust. Even when trust felt like a muscle he'd never trained, he started doing small things differently. He no longer apologized for needing time. He no longer said, "I'm fine," when he wasn't. He no longer laughed to hide discomfort. He let silence be silence. He let tears fall without shame. He let kindness in without suspicion, because he understood now the shadow wasn't gone, but it no longer had to scream to be heard. It had become a companion, not a saboteur, a messenger, not a master. And that's the quiet magic of integration. You stop being at war with yourself. You stop labeling parts of you as wrong. You stop chasing perfection and start embracing presence. Wholeness isn't a destination. It's a relationship with yourself, with your history, with your heart. It's the knowing that every version of you, the angry, the anxious, the avoidant, belongs, because they were all trying to help, and now they can rest. If you've ever felt torn between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be, if you've ever judged your reactions only to discover they were born from protection, then maybe what you need is not to be fixed, but to be found by yourself, by the one who stayed, the one who listened, the one who didn't walk away when it got dark, the you that's still here, still breathing, still trying. Still worthy not because you're perfect, but because you're present. And that is more than enough. It always has been. The shadow never left Ethan, but it stopped hiding. It no longer showed up in panic, no longer whispered shame in his quiet moments. Now it spoke gently, and he listened. Some days it still reminded him of old fears, still tugged at the edges of his confidence, still asked, "Are you sure it's safe to feel this much?" But now Ethan had an answer. "Yes, and even if it's not, I'll stay." Because healing isn't about never feeling fear. It's about walking forward anyway, with your shadow beside you, not behind you, not buried, but known. And when something is known, it no longer controls you. It becomes a teacher, a compass, a reminder of everything you've survived and everything you're capable of choosing now. The part of Ethan that once ruined everything wasn't a monster, it was a messenger. It was never saying, "Break this." It was asking, "Will you finally see me?" And once he did, the sabotage ended. Not because he forced it, but because he understood it. That's what wholeness is. Not pushing parts of you away, but welcoming them home. Not overpowering your pain, but sitting beside it. Not pretending you're fearless, but learning you're brave. And that bravery, it's quiet, gentle, consistent, like showing up every day for yourself. So if this story echoed somewhere inside you, if you've seen glimpses of your own shadow in these words, then maybe it's time to stop running, time to stop blaming, time to turn toward the part of you that hurts and say, "I see you, I'm not leaving." Because when you say that, really say it, everything begins to change, not with willpower, but with presence, not with punishment, but with compassion, not with exile, but with return. So if you're still here, still breathing with me at the end of this journey, I want to invite you to leave a small message below, 3 words. I'm done running. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for you, a declaration, a beginning, a moment of meeting your shadow with open eyes and an open heart, because this is not the end, it's just the first page of something real, something whole, something yours.